now there's enough with word processors and other things to kind of, back out of almost any pit you get into. But I can't tell you. In fact, I have a box of discs at my office in Austin that is literally every time I would save those early games, Calibeth, Ultima 1, Ultima 2, you'd always save it onto a new disc. Every save it was a new disc. And so I have just boxes and boxes and boxes of basically every iteration because otherwise, inevitably, and even with that diligence, you'd end up erasing whatever your current state was and have to, back up to the last time you forced yourself to make a backup. And yeah, so yes, I'm familiar with that sinking feeling of, of realizing you have just lost, a big pile of work.
Well, yeah, especially because obviously, as I kind of discussed a bit, it's like when you have a discussion with somebody, it's a bit different than having to go back and code something in a way, because when you
Right.
code something, you got to code it a certain way regardless. But when you have a
Right.
conversation, it's sort of
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
a bit
that's
all over
true.
the
And in
place.
fact, in coding, the second time you code it, it's probably better than the first time you coded it. And the risk with the conversation is it sounds less extemporaneous.
Yeah, it's a bit tangent, but I wanted to be a in-game development when I was younger, and then I programmed my first programs, and I was like, yeah, there's no way I could ever be a programmer.
Yeah, you're like, wait a minute, this is yeah, exactly.
But maybe it was the one that I got started with, the code that I got started with. I coded with Java, and I hear a lot of people are not really a fan of it, so I'm not sure if maybe that was
Yeah,
the
good
reason why.
question. My personal opinion on that is, that there are no particularly great programming languages. They all have their ups and downs. Depends on what problem you're tackling at that exact moment too. So yeah, hard to say. Well, we are where we are though. So, but anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, let's. Obviously, this still remains a subject I enjoy chatting about. So happy to chat.
Okay. Yeah. So to start from the beginning, at this point of the video, everybody will know who you are. I will
Yep.
have done your little history, but they won't know where you've been. So can you give us I guess, a breakdown of where you've been since your time at NCSoft?
Yeah. Well, post NCSoft, well, of course, the transition to out of NCSoft is punctuated by a little off-planet sojourn where with full knowledge and support from the NCSoft executive team, including all the way up to, I chatted about this years before I went with the president of NCSoft, TJ Kim. I had scheduled a trip to ride on a Russian Soyuz rocket up to the International Space Station, where I stayed on board for 2 weeks. And in fact, I did promotions for Tabula Rasa, around that flight. Not only did I send a secret message to the Tabula Rasa players written in Logos that I showed during launch, actually like 2 or 3 minutes into the launch process, as I was speeding away from the Earth, I sent a secret message out to players. And we took the digitized DNA of a large number of players and media personalities, including Stephen Colbert, up to the space station on the Immortality Drive, which was also a promotion for Tabula Rasa. But then, right as I got back, and I mean right as I got back, I was literally still in quarantine in a hospital bed in Star City in Russia when I received a phone call from NCSoft saying, "Hey, by the way, we've decided it's time to part company." And of course, my first reaction, was, well, it's your prerogative as to parting company. I mean, I work at your behest, and if you've decided it's time for me to depart, that's fine. But can't we at least wait till I get out of this hospital bed and I'm back home with my team and we can discuss this like adults, face to face? And I was told, nope, we've got a press release already prepared, and this is happening, and it's happening right now. And while I continue to try to object not to their choice because that's their prerogative, but rather their timing, I was ultimately overruled, and so we parted ways a bit oddly in my mind. And so with that, since I had literally just had this other pinnacle life experience, other than making games, it's already a pretty good life experience. I remained kind of retired, you might say, or out of the direct involvement in game development for about a year. And during that year, it was actually a good time for me to be off because I was spending a lot of time on space initiatives and touring and talking about my experiences in space. But then more recently, the same group of us, that the core group that that I'd already worked with at my first company, Origin, who all, when we departed EA, came together as Destination Games, which was acquired by NCSoft. Those folks had also all wandered out over that next year, and so we got together and we formed Portalarium, the company. My third job since high school is my third company since high school, Portalarium, and we're creating Shroud of the Avatar, which I think is sort of the spiritual successor to the work I did in the Ultima series, Ultimas 1 through 9, as well as Ultima Online.
Okay, and so we have an idea of sort of how you left the company now, and then where you went, I guess, after to continue working in game development. And so I want to kind of go a little bit backwards, which seems kind of strange in terms of the timeline, but I think it's important to start from the inception of Tabula Rasa and kind of give everybody the history of its early inception up until, of course, its demise, which now we're familiar with how that transpires at the end, but we need to know a little bit about the beginning.
Yeah, well, when it's probably worth mentioning, even before we had anything called Tabula Rasa, kind of what led us to kicking it off even. My entire first 25 years or so of my career was largely based on a single product line, the Ultima series. In fact, its roots go back all the way really to this series of games I wrote called D&D, D&D 1, D&D 2, up to D&D 25. And of course, that was based upon the paper game Dungeons and Dragons, and these were never meant to be published. These were just games I was doing for myself, but back to 1974, 1975. And these, and then if you take that all the way up through, Ultima Online and Ultima 9, that takes us right up to basically the year 2000. So that's, 25 years. And so when we split off to form Destination Games, sort of the one thing I didn't want to do at that moment was medieval fantasy. I didn't want to, have just finished 25 years of a single line of work and immediately go into competition sort of against myself. And so, I said, as we formed that company, I said, let's do something that's not, strictly speaking, medieval fantasy. And we'd only existed, about 2 weeks independently before the company called NCSoft, which had developed this great game called Lineage, gave us a phone call. And, at that moment, we didn't really know much about NCSoft. So we had to kind of look them up and realize that, Lineage was built truly as an homage to Ultima Online. And yet in Asia, especially Korea, it was, tens to hundreds of times bigger than Ultima Online. So this is a game that, at that time was globally dominant. And the original developer of that game, a guy named Jake Song, had already moved to the United States and was hoping to set up and had been actually trying to set up U.S. operations for NCSoft. And when they saw that we were free agents as Destination Games, they called us up and flew to Austin, Texas. And literally on the spot, we thought, what better partner could we have with the people who not only think like we do and built games in sort of our image, but also had surpassed us so resoundingly. We thought these would be great people to work with that we could learn from. They could help us enter the Asian markets, which were now the biggest markets on Earth. And so, we were very excited when we got a chance to work together. But the quandary that we faced, which is, I think, ultimately what led us to make some decisions which proved to be ill-fated, was we said, look, do we want to start, Jake himself moved to Austin, Texas. And then we said, look, do we want to start 2 games? The Jake Song game, whatever it might be, and the Richard Garriott Lord British game, whatever it might be, or do we work together on a single game? And when we debated that, one of the factors in the debate was, here we were, a brand new company, new teams having worked, trying to work together. If we started 2 products, that would mean we'd have to fund two large products. And MMOs are big and they're expensive and they take a long time. And so we thought, look, it would be, we thought irresponsible to ask the parent company to start immediately funding with this new organization two giant new MMOs. And so we said, look, let's do one. And so Jake and I and some folks that he brought over from Korea and my team from Austin, Texas, we got to work on a new game title that we started out immediately, called it Tabula Rasa, because then we're all starting from a blank slate. Let's just see where these ideas lead us. And what was interesting about this startup is, we all felt very confident in our abilities. The team was already, a fairly large team was already together, and that was actually part of the problem, is that our burn rate was already fairly large from the get-go, because we were, we're putting together two smaller teams that became immediately one larger team. And we began to put together ideas for Tabula Rasa that that Jake and I would work on. We'd have the local art team work on it. We'd send this artwork over to Korea, and immediately that was met with resistance. And so what's interesting is, and sort of as one of the signs of problems, is the first literally full 2 years of work on the original designs of Tabula Rasa were shot down over and over again. And so, and the reasons why were interesting to analyze. For example, we were going to do a game that had a lot of Eastern influence. And so to do that, not only were we kind of bringing in kind of Eastern themes and storylines and magic styles, but our artists would create, some Eastern style shrines and pagodas and things with little curved roofs that you're probably familiar with of Asian architecture. And the feedback we would regularly get from Korea was that they didn't look right. And the parallel that resonated most with us when they would describe why it didn't look right is they said, look, if we in our Asian office made a European castle and sent it over to you, but instead of the crenellations being exactly perfectly straight, the up and down sawtooth or the square wave look, if they were slightly puffy like a marshmallow, then you would think of it as a cartoon castle versus a serious, scary castle. And, as you guys are trying to do things that might work over here in Asia, you're making these sort of mistakes that are perhaps too subtle for you to see, but are immediately obvious for us overseas. And so that's perfectly good, perfectly reasonable feedback. But what happened during that first 2 years is, at the end of year one and at the end of year two, we literally scrapped the project and started over. And at the end of year two, Jake Song quit. And he literally quit and left NCSoft entirely. And what's interesting about that moment is Jake was, well, obviously, had done some phenomenally good games in Korea, very successful games in Korea. At the time, his mastery of English was relatively thin, and his communication with us as a team, we also were, had difficulty extracting from him even just understanding what he wanted, frankly. And even understanding whether he was happy or unhappy. So we were frankly shocked when he just kind of just up and left the company. However, then the rest of the folks at NCSoft called us up and said, yeah, well, he was never really happy over here in Korea. In fact, the reason why he's in the United States is he never really got along with people in Korea, and he was kind of pushed out in a sense. And we were going like, well, thanks for telling us. And really, no, he didn't, the communication was so light we couldn't have known. But the point is, we burned 2 years and millions of dollars trying to make a game that we could sell globally. And we were not successful at that process. So then what we did with the absence of Jake, we said, look, we need to make a game that we like. And, if it does well in Asia, fine. But, we first need, without him as an evangelist to this style of kind of Asian influence, we were already having an impossible time of it. So let's just abandon that. Let's make a game that we like ourselves, that we want to play here in the United States. And that is when the Tabula Rasa that people eventually saw came into being. However, what also happened at that moment was, while we believe the project started over from scratch, in fact, functionally, that is exactly what happened, NCSoft didn't see it that way. NCSoft said, you're 2 years late, you're millions of dollars in the hole, when's the game going to ship? hopefully at the end of next year. And we're going, well, it can't ship at the end of next year. We've literally been forced to start over from scratch. There's, you can write off that other amount. You can hold us at fault for a failure that we as a company all decided to get into together. All of us from the executive leadership down to the team, we were all part of the decision to do this. I said, but it's not fair for you to hold us behind schedule for this new game that we were starting without Jake Song.
And what year is this? Sorry, what year is this during this whole, I guess, process early on after the first 2 years?
Well, let's see. It would have been, 2001 is when we started the company. So it would have been like 2001 to 2003 kind of time frame.
Okay.
That these are occurring.
Okay.
And,
sorry,
and
continue.
no, of course. And I might be off by a year, might be 2002 to 2004, but that's close. And so we knew that we had sort of Damocles hanging over us, frankly, from the day we started, because we started getting this pressure of, understandable. I'm not even saying it's necessarily incorrect pressure. It's just that unfortunate that, when you're, I've mentioned a number of times before, there's sort of two key important parts of a game development that you can sort of get a feel for whether it's going to be easy or hard. And that is, what is it? How easy can you get the product started? And do you have time to really polish it and finish it at the end? Those are the two key parts. And we had already missed the first part, which was a clean start. We started spending money before we had a solid foundation. And that's always, dangerous would be an understatement. But we knew that, and that's just where we were. So we did our best to kind of pick up and carry on. And then we immediately then felt the problem of the second half, which was, were we going to get time on the back end to polish it properly? And we knew that was going to be, even at the time we really started, we knew that was already going to be tricky. But we also really liked where we were going. We actually, to this day, I think the Tabula Rasa, the foundation of Tabula Rasa we created, I am very pleased with. I like the game a lot. I think we did some really amazingly innovative things with it. I loved the control points. I loved the way that the ebb and flow of territory control could happen, and that storyline would become available or not available. How combat was both real time, but also tactical. Had the strategic element of cover and other things associated with it in it. And so I was very pleased with the way Tabula Rasa itself developed once we were kind of cleanly doing it as a domestic-only product. However, then as we started getting close to the end, then the pressure, as always, comes, but more in this case because of the slow start. The pressure comes to, hey, when are you done? Let's call it done. Stick a fork in it and get it out the door, because time's a wasting and money's a burning. And so while we knew that we were being pressured to ship it earlier than would be optimal, because it's an online game, we kept coming back to the story of EVE Online. And EVE was already doing phenomenally well at this point. And but EVE, as I'm sure you remember, launched fairly light, fairly thin, fairly obscurely, but they kept plugging away at it and improving it and adding to it, and their community grew over time, and still to this day has a thriving and very successful, one of the most successful MMOs of all time. And so we said, look, we feel confident enough in the basis of this game that let's, now is the time to get it out. This is we felt if we tried to push to wait much longer, they'd pull the rug out from underneath us, and that would obviously be a bad ending. We felt we'd kind of hung on to it as long as we could, and so we went ahead and released it. And so it had about a level of rockiness and lovers and detractors that I think we should have and could have predicted based on that moment. But still, the team and I felt very good about the foundation, and were devoted to continuing to improve it and refine it over time. And of course, that's when later that year, 6 months to a year later, is when I made my little off-planet sojourn. And during the year or so that it was operating and was slowly growing, it's still, any game in the United States, anything but the very biggest games in the United States are literally a drop in the bucket compared to a Korean MMO title at that time. I mean, even if we had done phenomenally well in the United States by our own standards, we would have been a minor game from a Korean standard standpoint until we managed to grow it really big here and then figure out a way to conquer Asia with it if possible.
Do you think that's
And
one of NCSoft's problems? Because when I was doing my City of Heroes video, I was reading one of their kind of financial statements that they released, and it seemed to be to me that for them, they always saw the American market as underperforming, and it's kind of hard not to when the Korean market, especially for them, was making up like 80% or something like that of their revenue. Do you think it was kind of always just a problem, I guess, in that sense, that they were
well,
always looking at it?
yeah, there's no question that would shade your perspective. Although they really wanted to do well in the United States, even though you're right, even at best, even with the best-selling games in the United States, which were amongst the best-selling MMOs in the United States, also at the time, it was never a big part of their total revenue. But another factor comes down to ways different companies think of operational strategy. It's when you look at anything your company can do, or frankly anything an individual can do, one of the common motivations to kill things or get rid of the things that aren't performing so well is often referred to as opportunity cost. If I've got 10 people chasing something that's never going to be important to my bottom line, and I instead could have those same 10 people or the budget of those 10 people chasing something that is important to my bottom line, then even if the smaller thing is profitable, I'd much rather them, from a shareholder standpoint, be focusing on something that has even more, that is even more profitable. And so a lot of companies, shed low performing but even profitable activity because of what they perceive as this opportunity cost. Now, and by the way, that's real, and I endorse that, and it's a real issue, and by the way, I don't begrudge NCSoft making that choice. That's their, we work for them. That is their prerogative. However, I do have a different perspective. The way we would say it at Origin, and this is for solo player games or offline games before MMOs, but this is sort of one of the ways we looked at it, is we said, look, if you have a team that is developing a game, and then 2/3 of the way through the game, you have your doubts as to whether it's going to be a big seller. So you can either kill the game or let it finish. Our opinion at Origin was always, let's finish the game. And the reason why we chose to finish the game is because you really never know until it's out whether it really work or not. And if you kill it before it finishes, the team is never going to believe it's their fault. They're going to believe it's the company's fault for killing their child, so to speak. And odds are they're not going to stay with the company. Odds are that team will split up. Half of them will leave the company. They're all going to be unhappy about it. And none of them have been through the process of finishing a game, which is a really hard thing to do that you want everyone to have lived through to make them a better employee. And so we also thought by finishing the game, even if it didn't go well, the team is now finished. They'll have now seen the public response to it. They won't blame the company if it doesn't do as well as they hoped. And they'll probably be much more skilled at taking this challenge on the next time, and they'll listen to your feedback about, hey, that may not be the best way to go earlier if it's sort of been proven out to them. And so we always tried to err on the side of, when possible, maintain these teams as a cohesive, unified, finishing things and moving on elegantly, because we felt it was better in the long-term health of our ability to do our jobs. And so we tended to just err, and probably err too far in the other way. But it is just at least showcase the different perspective.
Okay, and so starting from the beginning and then kind of leading towards the end, the one part I want to highlight kind of in between the timeline of the game being destroyed or deleted, however you want to, say. And
Shut down.
Shut down, exactly. And then from the beginning, the inception, there's like a period of which you covered a little bit, but I wanted to address since I know that it's probably a point of contention for some. And some people might say to you, know what, Tabula Rasa failed because Richard Garriott went to space. And I want to hear sort of your response about that whole thing.
Sure, of course. And as you would expect, I've heard that a lot. But what's important to know about my little off-planet sojourn is, first of all, we planned for it years in advance. just because you have to pick a launch date about 3 years out, so it was not a surprise. But also, the whole trip was, the main impact part was the 2 week flight itself, and to be honest, maybe 2 weeks to a month ahead of time, and absolutely 2 weeks after time when I was in quarantine recovering, were lost. So I lost 2 to 3 months worth of eye on the ball, so to speak. The rest of the time was relative modest at best of its impact on the development of the game. I did, once a quarter, I had to go out for a medical test or two, and even one time I had to actually have surgery to remove a chunk of my liver to be able to fly. So that's probably another week I was down when I was in the hospital post surgery. But that was 2 years before my flight, or a year and a half or so before my flight. And the rest of the time, while I was attending a variety of classes for how to operate, some space hardware, those were only a couple hours a day. And the rest of the time, I was, as usual, online with the team, working on the game. And most of that, I was back in Austin working on the game. But occasionally, I would do that when I was in Russia doing some training. And so to think that I wasn't thinking about Tabula Rasa and I wasn't working on Tabula Rasa would be inaccurate. That we, my job then, and as well as my job now, is to manage, bring together a team, manage the team, set goalposts. I'm the what most people don't understand about my role. What I think makes me useful to this day in my role is because I've sort of been there and done that at all levels of scale of a game previously. And so, I was the artist with back in the stick figure era. I was the sound developer when you had simple sawtooth waves, for out of your speaker. I was, of course, the programmer. I was the writer, etc. And so now, when we build a team, I still set the goalposts, and I'm still the number one player of the game. To this day, with the game I'm working on right now, Shroud of the Avatar, there is no developer on the team who has even close to the number of hours played in the game that I do. And I do that because I'm the one that sets the goalpost and says, here's what I believe our game should feel like. And now I have a team of great managers that manage the team to try to create something that feels the way we've just described it. And then I'm the number one playtester of sorts, you could say, to actually play it over and over and over and over again and help guide us to fit into that goalpost, or occasionally reset the goalpost if we're having trouble reaching it, or if we reach it and it doesn't seem quite right. And so I was able to do that same work I was able to do through Tabula Rasa throughout the project without really any significant hiccup.
Okay, and then if I remember correctly, the period in which before, of course, I guess when you announced that you were going to space, this is a period in which NCSoft was well aware of everything that was going to happen, and it just so happened that they still wanted the game to release within the current, or I guess at the time, current schedule that it was initially.
Yeah, that's correct. Since I had to pick this date 3 years out, I went to TJ Kim, who is the president of NCSoft, and I said, hey, and by the way, even, we've had plenty of long chats over Korean barbecue and soju about space. He knew, before we ever was part of NCSoft, he knew this was kind of one of my life's passions, and I'd built these companies to allow myself to go. And so when that flight slot opened up 3 years out, we sat down over dinner and had a conversation about it, because we said, look, we don't, we have an adage that we've had since Origin and NCSoft, and now even at Portalarium, where we say, there is no good time to take a vacation. And so therefore, there's no bad time to take a vacation. There's no way you can predict it. Inevitably, if somebody says, I'm going to take my kids to Disney World over Christmas to New Year's, inevitably, that ends up being some really critical do or die milestone that's coming up that person individually is needed for. And so pressure comes on them to abandon their family vacation they've planned for a year and, leave their kids and family, high and dry while they come into the office, sadly. And because we've seen that happen so many times, we've actually just said, look, try to let everybody know ahead of time that you're going to go so that we can plan for coverage, but then, leave it there and let the cards where they lie and and we'll figure it out. And that's sort of the way we believe and the way we've operated to this day. And so, we didn't know where the launch would be 3 years previous to launch, but we all agreed that we could manage through it and we'd make the best of it.
Okay, and then I'm trying to think of how I guess I should organize my next two questions. So I wanted to talk about how you, I guess, were able to procure the funds to go to space in the first place, and I think that's the story with Origin, and maybe we should talk about that before I talk about the court case with NCSoft, because maybe just the way it's
yeah, sure. So
timeline.
so taking yourself to space is not cheap. And actually, this trip the time that I did take was actually my second serious run. It was the second slot that I'd had to fly myself to space. The first actually came, 8 years or so after I had sold my first company, Origin, to Electronic Arts. And the company I'm one of the co-founders of, a company called Space Adventures, had, in fact, I funded the research performed by the Russian Space Agency to tell us if they could fly a civilian and how much it would cost. And we predicted that they would say yes, and we predicted the price would be $20 million. And after I paid personally the $300,000 for them to do the research, they came back and said yes, and the price is $20 million. So we were pretty pleased with that. And because that's what we had expected, I wouldn't have funded the research if I didn't think I could pay it, because that was my whole goal, is I wanted to go. And so in the year 2000, I had finally arranged my first opportunity to fly myself into space. When I'd sold Origin to Electronic Arts, and Electronic Arts stock over 8 years that I held it, had gone up significantly. I was, had a multiple of that ticket price, in the bank. And I thought, hooray, I'm going to take myself to space. And you might remember in the year 2000, that was when the internet stock market bubble burst. And right after attaining the rights to fly to space, the stock market cratered. And not only did I no longer have the money to pay for my space flight, but I was forced to stop building on a house that I've still never finished. Had to literally stop mid-construction, and I basically went broke. I mean, I went to net worth of basically zero. So I was literally wiped out, and had to sell that seat to a guy named Dennis Tito, who became the first private citizen to fly into space instead of myself. And I circled back, and that's when we started Destination Games, which almost immediately was acquired by NCSoft. NCSoft stock also went up dramatically after we joined forces. In the United States, we helped them acquire other titles like City of Heroes, City of Villains, Guild Wars, and all these games we helped manage to success as well in the United States. So even though people only, quote, credit me with Tabula Rasa, it's important to know that I'm also, the principal founder of the entire U.S. organization, and was key not only to bringing on board these other products, but working with them to ensure their quality and their marketing and their launch and everything else. So we were very busy and making NCSoft lots of money in many ways outside of just working on one project. Well, when I had that discussion with TJ Kim that 3 years from now I'm going to have to take this flight, well, the price had gone up. The price was now $30 million. And so TJ was also, and NCSoft broadly was also well aware of the fact that I would have to, sell stock in order to, pay for that flight. Well, what's interesting about that is you pay for your flight before you fly. I mean, they're not going to let you fly and then pay. You have to pay first. And so I started to pay for my, right when I started training, I started sending, millions of dollars over to Russia, which also means I started selling millions of dollars worth of NCSoft stock, when suddenly the NCSoft board of directors started complaining. And they started complaining. They said, Richard, we don't like the fact, we don't like the public impression of you selling NCSoft stock prior to the launch of Tabula Rasa. It looks publicly like you don't have faith in the company and you're trying to dump it while the stock price is high, and you might know that Tabula Rasa may not be going to go well or something like this. And so we think it's a downward pressure on the stock price for you to be selling. And so actually, so this became a point of stress because I'm going, well, I can't not sell stock because that's all the value I have in the world is NC stock. And so I really kind of have to. And so that's kind of began some of the pressure. I don't think going to space was actually the big deal for the executives or board of NCSoft. It really was the fact that I needed to sell stock, and they just didn't like having a large shareholder like myself selling stock, and especially at this time. But I frankly just had no choice. Continued to sell some stock, made the flight. And then of course got the call, saying, having been back on Earth for a whopping 2 days, got the call that NCSoft wanted to part company.
Okay, and then so we can transition into the court case, and I guess I want you to give everybody the breakdown of how that starts. So you get back, you're let go within the 2 days that you're on Earth. And then there's a period of time in which it seems like everything kind of goes quiet that you mentioned earlier. And then I think sometime in, 2009, I believe? Or was it 2000? I think it was 2009 at that point.
Yeah. So exactly. So the way that it transpired is, it's NCSoft's prerogative to, hire or fire whoever they wish. So, if they wanted to part company with me, obviously I had a different opinion. I didn't agree with it, but I always felt that's their prerogative. However, it almost is. So I flew in October of 2008. So it was actually by December of 2008, something much more sinister began to unravel, which is that they had acquired they acquired Destination Games for a combination of stock and options, and I had needed to sell and by the way, it's also important to note that in 2008, another really important financial issue is happening called the financial crisis. 2008 is when when the whole stock market crashed again. And so all of the paper value that I had in NCSoft was also, again, crashing to zero, just like my EA value for my last time I was trying to go to space was crashing to zero. And so in the end, I had to sell 100% of the stock that I had in NCSoft in order to pay for my flight. Now, at the time I booked the flight, the NCSoft stock was worth triple the amount of a flight or more. But as I was making payments and the stock prices were coming down, it was worth less and less and less. And by the time I flew to space, I was again on paper basically broke. However, what I did have was NCSoft options, and so however those options weren't worth anything. Because the value of the stock was back down to the value that the options were stamped at. So if I were to, quote, exercise those options, it would provide me no value or almost no value. And NCSoft, right at the end of the year, like 3 or 4 days prior to the end of the year, sent me a letter and said, you must, because you quit, you must exercise those options before year end, or we will cancel them and they will just go away. To which I immediately responded and said, "You can't do that. You acquired my company for these options. It would not be legal for you to cancel them. And obviously, so we're going to have a fight on our hands." But so I immediately hired lawyers. But the problem is I only had like 72 hours to either exercise them or they said they would cancel them. And I thought, well, I'm now in the pickle of I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. If I don't exercise the options and they cancel them, they literally have zero value to me. And if I don't win a court case, I've gotten nothing out of it. On the other hand, if I exercise the options, I can get a little bit of money out of it. But then I have to go back to court and fight for the lost future value that I should have gotten had they not tried to cancel them, which was a whole other kind of legal battle. So in the end, with legal advice, we exercised the options and we filed suit against them for illegally canceling my options that they had paid to acquire my company, or threatening to cancel them. And so by the way, my advice to everybody is never go to court. Going to court is scary, painful. No one is going to be happy. It was one of the, in many ways, one of the worst experiences of my life. But the good news is we prevailed both in federal court as well as in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, after which they would have only been able to go to the Supreme Court if there was some constitutional crisis. And the decisions were all unanimous and relatively easy. So I feel very vindicated on the truth of the issue, but it's also very clear. They really just had no legal basis on which to do this. And my biggest takeaway and kind of sadness of the court case was not the winning or the losing. It was sort of my sadness about my belief in humanity, and especially people who I had done business with face to face, and in particular with T.J. Kim, who's the president of NCSoft, who obviously was very well aware of all of this stuff. In depositions and what's called discovery of looking at documents, the NCSoft had circulated documents, discussing, and T.J. Kim personally saying, "Hey, I think it's time we part company with Richard." And again, I don't begrudge that. Other than when he got up in court, he said, "Oh, I love Richard. I would never have parted way with him. We think Richard's the best. We didn't fire him. He quit." And that was just a bold-faced lie. And it was a bold-faced lie, not just because obviously I know what happened, but also because there's a paper trail of what happened. And that's also why the court case was easy to resolve, is because there was a paper trail showing exactly what they intended to do and exactly how they went about doing it. And yet they were willing to sit in a U.S. court of law and frankly lie through their teeth. And that was sad to see that, corporations and people who feel they're, somehow either above the law or have some moral high ground are willing to, frankly, in my mind, commit such atrocities in court. Fortunately, got called out.
So that's your more recent major entanglement with a big publisher, NCSoft. And so I kind of want to go back and talk about the ethos surrounding Electronic Arts. You sell Origin to them, and kind of give me that story. So after you sell it to them, I'm assuming you're part of the company at that point. What takes place after that?
Well, sir, there's actually kind of a double whammy with EA. But let me even rewind and tell you about the one that happened before we became part of EA. Yeah. So when Trip Hawkins was still founder and president of Electronic Arts, we actually used EA as a distributor for a period of time. And but we elected to quit using them as a distributor when they started to publish this game, which was a legal infringement on Ultima. And when I say legal infringement, I mean the person who wrote this other game had lifted precisely the random green dot pattern that I used for grass and mountains and basically all the other shapes that made the tiles of Ultima. This was just some young kid doing some homage to Ultima, and as a shortcut, use the tiles that I had created for Ultima. So it's legally, you can't use somebody else's art, whole, and not expect to, be called out for copyright infringement. And when we pointed this out to Trip was indignant about how we couldn't push EA around, we couldn't block them from doing other role-playing games. And when we complained, we're not trying to stop you from doing other role-playing games. You already are doing other role-playing games, which I don't complain about. This one is, infringing in a very obvious way. They said, Trip said, well, maybe there's a few things we have to change, but we're doing it anyway. And so that was the first time we said, look, we really just don't want to be doing business with EA. We didn't like their kind of the rationale for their decision making, or at least Trip's decision making. And so we left EA. But then EA turned around and sued us, and they sued us over what was also kind of irrelevant, things that had nothing to do with our contracts with them. But we were a tiny, tiny company at this point, and they sued us for so much money it would absolutely have put any company out of business on something that was, on the one hand, completely apocryphal, but on the other hand, we couldn't even afford a real lawyer. I mean, and so EA said, look, screw you. You're either going to sue you or we'll settle out of court with you for paying us a couple $100,000, which even that was more money than we could earn in, half a year or so. But we ended up actually settling out of court and paying them versus go to court just because we just couldn't afford to even fight the fight. And later when my brother was meeting with Trip, and Tripp invited him over to sit down, and they actually both were in Tokyo. And Tripp said, "Hey, Robert, come on over, have some tea with me." And Robert said, "Well, okay, I'll sit with you for a second, but you have to know I'm still pretty upset about the way you pushed us around, on this other issue. I'm not feeling super friendly towards you right now." And Tripp said literally something like, "That's what I like about you, Robert. You're so naive in the ways of business." And of course, since that day, my brother has sort of had it in for Tripp, and we sort of just said, "Look, that's EA early on was, that's an example of how open they were about, business is competition, it's war, and you should use any tactic that you can to get ahead. And part of getting ahead is also pushing down others." And so they literally just don't think it's a big deal to win by being superior or win by interfering with anybody else's ability to come and truly compete. And so with EA in those days, you were either a friend or you were an enemy. And once you became an enemy, they did whatever they could with whatever tools they could to push you further down. And again, we just thought that was inappropriate. It's not illegal. We just didn't like it. We didn't want to be part of it. And but then after Tripp left, there came a time when the fight over real estate on a store shelf at retail became fought over and had to be purchased. So you had to literally purchase your linear foot of shelf space. And if you didn't have 12 products a year at least, it was hard to own shelf space because you needed to be able to rotate out what products you were selling. And so those companies didn't like to talk to small publishers like us. They really only wanted to talk to big publishers. So we were getting squeezed out. We really had to join up with somebody just to get access to the shelf space. And at this point, EA made a pretty good case about how they had kind of grown up and changed and could really help solve this problem for us. And so we actually joined forces with EA. And for at least a time, that went pretty well. I think Ultima 7, where I both made fun of EA, but also launched through EA, is one of the high points of the Ultima series. But pretty quickly, that also we began to see some kind of new challenges, shall we say, of working with Electronic Arts. In particular, EA had acquired us to kind of be their new leadership in PC gaming, which we were excited to be because EA was big in consoles but not PCs, and they wanted to be again in PCs. And so they let us, frankly, they gave us so much rope, we hung ourselves pretty well. We doubled the size of our PC development business, which was kind of our first big mistake because that meant that we gave project control to, a whole slew of people who had never run a project independently before. And many of those were not successful. And when we'd grown very slowly and very organically previously, and so I think we managed that growth more cautiously when we were spending our own hard-earned money. And then once we had a few products that either didn't make it across the finish line or didn't do as well as Ultima and Wing Commander, EA's opinion of us also started becoming a little more taxed. And but the real kicker came really about the time of Ultima Online, and kind of a really strange turn of events where, when we tried to get Ultima Online started, EA was absolutely not interested in online gaming. There hadn't been any big online game successes previously. When me and Star Long came and made the case, they were not moved by our belief in the internet making this now the time to strike. And eventually, the only way we got Ultima Online started was by doing a relatively childish metaphoric stomping our feet and holding our breath until they let us do it. But it really did take us just the sheer force of will to insist that we get the opportunity to go build a prototype. And when the prototype was eventually available, people signed up for the prototype and paid to be part of to get a beta test CD, with an order of magnitude greater sales than they had predicted the final game would have. And so immediately EA kind of caught on this was a really big deal, and suddenly this bastard stepchild of a game became the most important thing happening in EA world. And when it did finally ship, it became the fastest selling PC game in Origin EA history. Yet at the end of that, while we wanted to go off immediately and do Wing Commander online and take maybe our other big property Crusader and put it online, EA didn't want to have those. They actually felt that Ultima was only worked as an online game because it had a 20-year following of hardcore fans, and they stopped the Wing Commander Online project, and that team split off and then went to go make Star Wars Galaxies for Sony, and then the rest of us ultimately left. This was about the year 2000 now, and that's when I left and a bunch of others left before we started to form Destination Games.
Okay, and then once you leave this form Destination Games, this is sort of where, so to back up a little bit, when people talk about EA, and I was one of those people, they used to think it was just like, oh, well, this is the first time big money's getting, introduced into gaming, and this is a good thing because now these little companies and stuff are going to get better funding, and that's sort of how it looked from the outside point of view. I mean, that's essentially how I saw it. I remember when EA acquired BioWare, I was naive enough to think that it was a good thing, which, not to rub salt in BioWare's recent troubles with Mass Effect Andromeda, but it's sort of, I guess, what's the word? Maybe seems vindicated in a way, where it's like, if you look at how, to me, EA is the perfect example of a big business coming in and making video games less about art and more about business. And so I want to talk about, with Destination Games, when they acquired you guys, was it just because they wanted your assets of the properties that you were working on? Did they just want to squeeze you out? Or was it just maybe in a strange way, a way to get back?
Well, no. So what's interesting about this is the EA's intent and NCSoft's intent were completely different. EA really was looking. They not only were buying the properties of Ultima and Wing Commander and a little less so Crusader, but also because they believed we could help them create great PC games going forward. What EA didn't even know about themselves at the time was they are not a great place for new intellectual property development. They're perfectly fine to do Madden 94, 95, 96, 97 and kind of squeeze the turnbuckles on an existing franchise that they can, replicate over and over again within a 1-year development cycle for sports. But they're terrible at coming up with a brand new IP from scratch because their business systems do not support innovation in intellectual property. And so that's why they've had to go acquire it. But even the people that they acquire aren't happy there because they're getting the squeeze versus getting the opportunity to create new IP. NCSoft was different. We didn't have any properties when we joined NC. When Destination Games formed, we were only 2 weeks old when we got acquired by NCSoft. And so NCSoft really was desperate. They'd been in the United States for 3 years. Jake Song and a small team was in LA for 3 years with a lot of money in their pocket from Lineage and the desire to invest in US developers and to help bring Lineage to the United States. And for 3 years, they'd made no progress. And so when they saw us, they said, look, we not only believe you guys can help make Lineage available and exciting here in the United States, but we believe you can make good products. And we believe you can help us acquire new teams across the United States to let us spend some of this wildly profitable Korean money in an area that has a lot of development talent. And so I think we did that for NCSoft. And when we joined NCSoft, we had zero intellectual property and obviously zero revenue. And within a year, maybe 2, they were earning hundreds of millions of dollars in the United States through the car combat game we acquired out of Colorado, through City of Heroes that we brought on from California, through Guild Wars that we brought on from Seattle, and how we were managing to measure to manage those while we were in-house creating an original product with Jake Song to be called Tabula Rasa.
Okay, and so my final question then is, when people talk, like let's make this specific to Tabula Rasa, since of course part of this interview will be in that video, and then the other part I want to release separately. So
yeah,
in regards to Tabula Rasa, I think it's important to highlight, or I guess maybe address the idea that, so when I make a lot of these death of a game videos, people say, well, it's just EA's fault, or well, it's SOE's fault, and everybody is always quick to blame the publisher. And obviously after talking to you, in this case with NCSoft, you can see a lot of the reasons why there would be blame there. And so my question to you is, do you think it's fair to always point the finger at the publisher? or do you
Yeah,
think it's just more maybe merit based, and it just so happens to swing that way?
at least in my case, I find it hard to blame the publishers for any of the less than wonderful responses the games I've been working on have had. And it's not that they don't deserve some of the blame, but in my case, I look at the two softest, worst, whatever you want to frame them as, launches of a game that I've ever had. One with EA I would use Ultima 8 as my example. One with NCSoft, Tabula Rasa as an example. And in both of those cases, I actually believe the foundation of the game, the idea for the game, I think was very strong. And it would be easy to point the finger at the publishers and go, you guys cut us off at our knees. You didn't let us finish it. You forced us to launch it when it wasn't finished, and therefore it is your fault. But I think that undersells the responsibility of the developer, and in this case, myself and the team. We in the case of Ultima 8, EA convinced us that shipping it this year with the marketing window that they had picked would be better than finishing it in the way that our heart of hearts felt it should be a year later, when the marketing window in their mind would have passed. And so we cut the heck out of it, features and refinements and polish, and released it to lackluster results that, frankly, if we had just fixed those things, I would have been much more proud of it. And I think the marketing window was irrelevant. And similarly with Tabula Rasa, the real problem, if I was going to point blame at NCSoft, I would say it's because they didn't, when we were working with Jake Song for 2 years and he left, that was not our fault. That was, we were working for them at what we all agreed, including with Jake and the Korean headquarters, we should be doing, and that did not work. And so when we started what became the Tabula Rasa we shipped, we should have started with a clean slate. We should have started with Tabula Rasa. And instead, they held us accountable for already being 2 years late and millions of dollars over budget, which put a stress on the finishing process, the sort of Damocles of, you guys we're going to cancel you if you don't finish now, that was inappropriate. But in the end, again, we were part of all these decisions. We weren't, it's not one person, it's not one company. I disagree with the way those companies are set up for our good, for sure, and I frankly think even for their own good. But you can also see how they get where they are. If these big companies are doing what is probably best, or they believe is best for their stockholders. And if you look, whether it's Ultima, Wing Commander, or Mass Effect, you look at these companies and they go, look, they've learned that they can't create new IP. They've learned that they can repeat an IP with reasonable levels, with at least some period of time to keep the doors open. And their cost of acquisition of a new IP is low enough to where they can continue to feed the monster by buying up somebody who frankly needs them at that moment to just, to finish up the great thing they're working on. But what they've not been able to prove they can do is either sustain those teams on the inside for the long haul or build new teams to create new IP. So they have to go, the monster has to continue to gobble up, other smaller companies again.
Okay. So I think that's pretty much, all I have in regards to Tabula Rasa.
That's great. And as you know, I've got a 11 o'clock cutoff here at the East Coast, so I've just got 6 minutes before I need to be in another meeting.
Okay, and so that's perfect timing. One last thing I wanted to say was, I know that your offices are in Austin. Does that
Correct.
mean that you're going to be at the RTX event in July?
Yes, I should be in Austin all of July. So we haven't actually planned what we're going to do at RTX, but I'll at least be present for the time. So if you're in Austin, we can definitely get together face to face for sure at that time.
Okay, yeah, because what I wanted to do something in Austin, I'll have somebody, a cameraman there, and he'll probably also be involved. But I wanted to just, I guess, talk shop with you about other games, other MMOs specifically that have failed over the years, and just sort of hear what somebody like you, the type of insight you might have versus obviously somebody like me.
Absolutely. Obviously love to talk about it.
Okay, I appreciate your time with this interview, and I appreciate, for the people who don't know, you doing this again.
Yeah, exactly. No problem. Really, my pleasure. It's no problem at all. So good luck getting this one recorded properly. Make a backup, quick.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Sure. Bye-bye.
Bye.